Hey everyone, welcome to lesson 4 of learning how to read music. And today we're talking about intervals and tones and semitones. So, what we're talking about is if you remember back to the first lesson when we were learning, all the notes have names, you've got the musical alphabet, and um, also the position on the music staff, that the treble clef and the bass clef of, where they are on the lines and spaces. We learned about, how to learn where all those notes live on the staff and everything like that. So we're coming back to that where we will look at the difference between two notes. And so I've got some music here to give us something to reference. Um, and you see here, that is an F and an A. And what that looks like on the piano is this F, oh, F and A. And so that interval is called a third. Now I'm going to share a document which will explain this a little bit more. Music intervals. So we've got, see here, the third. This is based on a C major. So the tonic is the bass note. And I guess in this example, that's a C major, and so the tonic is the C. And so the third note is E. And it looks like this on the piano. Hang on, I'll need to stop sharing so that you can see it properly. So that's the tonic, that's the C, and then that's the E is the third. So that interval is a third. There are other technical names, but we don't need to stress too much about what those technical names are. It's perfectly acceptable to just call them by the numerical value. And so that's a third. That C to E is a third. And what I showed you before, that F to A, that is a third. So in that musical alphabet, there's 7 notes, 7 letters. And so when you get from C to the next C, that is an octave. That is 8 notes. An octave is 8 notes. It's easy to remember, just like an octopus. And so it literally follows this pattern of, that's the tonic, or a perfect unison if you have 2 notes that are on there. So then we've got the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth being in the octave. So what does that look like in music? Well, remember how we had the lines and spaces? Let's see. All right, so I'm gonna find a hymn that's in C major so that it makes it a little bit easier and we don't have to worry about sharps and flats, because that's next week's lesson. So here we've got, this is in C major, and that note there, which is underneath the treble clef with a little line through it, that is the C. The D is the underneath the first line, and so on that bottom line, that is E. So 1, 2, 3, that's a third. Third, 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 third. See how each of these notes together is a third above the note below it. Then we've got this one. Coming a bit closer. So we count 1, space is 2, line is 3, space is 4, line is 5, space is 6. So that is a sixth between the E and the C, which looks like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, the reason this is important is because these intervals and the spacings of them, if you were to change the key, like this is in C major, but if you were to change the key to G major or D flat minor or something like that, it those intervals remain, and that is how you can then keep the same music going, but just in a different key. So third, 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 all the way through. And you'll see this a lot in the difference between the soprano and the alto um, parts in music, because this interval is really good for harmonizing. And so if you have a third interval, I mean you can see how they sound together. So that's, except for that sixth that's in there, that's all thirds. And you can imagine if you have a soprano voice and an alto voice singing that together, they harmonize very nicely. And so a third is a very, very common interval to have between the soprano and alto. And you know, that is something that you can use in lots of different situations. So I just realized I was still sharing. Sorry, that made it really hard to see what I was just doing. That's totally my bad. I need to remember that. So here, we'll have another example here. We've got that's third from the C to the E, and then this one, that's the D to the G. That is a fourth, and then a fourth, and then back to a third, and it sounds like this. So understanding both the existence of these intervals and what they're called, that can help you to when you look at it on the music to be able to see what that interval is, especially between the soprano and alto parts or the tenor and bass parts. Uh, and what it also means is that once your ear becomes trained to a third, um, if I'm playing a C and I ask you to harmonize with a third interval, you would, eventually be able to say, okay, well, after a C, we've got E, or going the other way around, if I play an E and ask you to harmonize a third down, C. Now, coming to understand what the notes are meant to sound like just by looking at them on the page, that is something that happens with familiarity and with practice uh, as you become familiar with the note and what it sounds like, what the pitch is. A G is a G, and then when you see it on the music, you can remember to G to sing it at that pitch because you've become familiar with what they sound like on there. Now, the other thing that we can use intervals for let's find something new. I'm I'm I, I am trying to find something that is not in but any sharps or flats because that's just complicating it. Okay. What the other thing I wanted to talk about is how we've got these intervals which are being played at the same time. That's being played for that word there, that lyric there. Uh, but what about going from one note to the next? What about that interval? See here, we're on the G, and then we go to an A, so that is a second, and a second. From the G to the A to the B to the C, we're going starting here on the G, and then a second, and then a second, and a second. The intervals get a little more interesting when you have a bigger jump. What can we find here? Here we've got in the soprano part, looking just at the top note, that's an E there, and then it jumps to a C. And so that interval, that is that sixth that we were looking at before. And so understanding that that's a sixth, when you understand what interval is there on the music, you can then get a better understanding of the note that you're going to jump to after this one. So that is the intervals, but the other thing I wanted to share with you today, if we go back to going back to the document, we've got tones and semitones. Now, if I forget to stop sharing when I show you what I'm doing on the piano or on the music, then someone tell me. But what we've got is tones and semitones. So I will stop sharing to show you on the keyboard soon. But you know how we've got the black keys that are there. If you go from a white key to a white key that has a black key in the middle, that is a tone. If you go from a white key to a white key and there is no black note in the middle, that is a semitone. So when the reason this counts is as you're going through, learning the scales and learning the different keys that music is played in, um, there is a pattern that always remains in a major scale. And so in a major scale, so we've got this one of C major, where we've got a tone and then another tone, and then we've got E to F is a semitone. And then F to G is a tone, G to A is a tone, A to B is a tone. So it's tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 and then another semitone at the end. That pattern of tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, that is a pattern that exists in every single major scale. Doesn't matter if it's C major, F major, B major. It is always a tone, tone, and then a semitone, and then a tone, 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 semitone. And I'll show you what that looks like. But first, I'm going to stop sharing. I remembered. Okay. So we've got our C major. Tone, tone. So tone, 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 semitone, tone, 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 semitone. So that's easy enough when they're all white keys. But what happens when you play, say, a D major? Now, a D major has two black keys. So how do we do that? So tone, meaning that we jump over the black key, and then we need another tone, but this is a semitone. So we go to the black key. So D, tone to E, tone to F sharp. And then, remember that pattern? Tone, tone, semitone. That's the G, because there's nothing in the middle. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. So we did the same thing at the end. We've got here this B to C. There's no black key, but we need to play a tone. So that takes it up to the C sharp. And then a semitone from the C sharp to the D. Hopefully that hasn't confused anyone too much, but that tone and semitone pattern is exactly the same for every major key. There are other patterns for the minors and everything like that. We're not getting into that now. The reason this is important in learning to read music is that when you have, you've seen me going through and, I've got to find um, a hymn to show you that's in, C major because it's got no sharps or flats. But you've seen it takes me a while because, almost every other hymn is in, you know, a different key to C major. So we've got this one. See that F sharp and the C sharp? We're going to get into that next lesson, but that means it's a D major, which is the scale that I just played. So it means that every F is an F sharp. And it means that every C is a C sharp. So the intervals and the tones and semitones, they still remain. And so as you're reading this, you can see, okay, we've got this D there, and then we jump to the A. So that's on the space there. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5. The D to the A is a fifth. The D to the F sharp is a third. So the reason I'm explaining this is so that when you see it on the music and you can see a D by itself and then the F and the A, the more you understand the intervals and the spacings and the tones and the semitones and everything like that, the more that you will be able to predict what what that is meant to sound like. So if we recap the lesson, bring this up again. We have the intervals, and the intervals are written in this way where when you're playing both notes at once. But these same intervals exist when you're going through the music and you've got, the first note, second note, third note, fourth note in a bar. You still understand those intervals, if you're going from a D to a B, you know that would be that is a sixth. Um, and as you recognize them as you're reading the music, you will come to understand what that is supposed to sound like. And same when you're playing the piano, start on any note. And if you're given an interval, you know what note comes next. In music, there are so many patterns that exist. That major scale pattern that I showed you before, that's one of them, but there are a lot of other patterns that exist in music. And it's these patterns that bring about the the way that music comes together to harmonize and uh, to just, when we look at how music is written and how the how composition occurs, where the certain techniques that are used to finish a piece and to add highlights to a piece. It all starts with this basic understanding of the intervals and moving through the tones and the semitones. So if I go through this a bit more with it, hang on, almost did it again. So I want to go through the tones and the semitones again. So C major is easy, tone, tone, semitone, because it's all just the white, and you can tell because we're just seeing where there's black keys and no black keys. So you can always come back to that as your bass pattern. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. Now, F sharp to G sharp is a tone. It's two semitones. C to C flat to C sharp, that is a semitone. C sharp to D, that is a semitone. F down to E is a semitone. It's a half step. And so this keyboard, these keys are written to follow that pattern of the semitones needing to be here and here. But F sharp to G sharp is a tone. B flat to C is a tone. B to C sharp is a tone. It's two half steps. And because there's no black note here, this becomes the semitone and that becomes the tone. Does that make sense? I hope I've explained that. Okay. So if we recap everything that we've looked at so far in this series, there's the musical alphabet, there's the placings, the places on the lines and the spaces that tell you what note belongs where and what that correlates to on the keyboard. We've looked at the note values, whether it's a minim that you hold for 2 beats, or a crotchet that's 1 beat, or a quaver that's half a beat. And we've looked at the rests. We've looked at when there is a rest, it just means just take a break, have a rest, silence. We should try that in primary sometimes. And then we also looked at the time signatures and what that relationship is between the top note and the bottom, sorry, the top number and the bottom number in the time signatures, and how that affects the rhythm of the piece and how many beats and what each beat is worth. And now we're going back to the actual pitch of the notes and how the pitch changes through intervals and through the progression of tones and semitones as we go through a scale. So just quickly, just for the fun of it, I'm going to show you a couple of different keys, because this is what we're getting into next week, the different keys that exist in music. I'm just going to do the major keys. We're not going to look at minors yet because that's for the advanced class. But we've got C major is all the white keys. Then we go to G major, which has one sharp. Then we go to D major, which has two sharps, the F sharp and then the C sharp. And then we hold on to these as we go to the next one. A has the C sharp and the F sharp, and it throws in the next one, a G sharp. And all of these are still holding that same pattern. Now we go to E, which has the F sharp, so that's a tone, and a semitone, a tone, tone, another tone, and the semitone to finish. That's the E. And then we go to the B major, which has all the black notes. So that's a tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone at the end. So it doesn't matter what it is. Then we go to F. Tone, tone, semitone. And then tone, 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 semitone. So we've got tones and semitones, and we've got intervals of what's the word to roll? First, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. Now, as you change keys, if I did that in a D major or a B major, we keep that pattern of the tones and semitones as we go through the intervals. So that means that here, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. That's an octave. First, that's the tonic. Second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. It's holding that pattern of the tones and the semitones. So if you have any questions about this, if there's anything that is not making sense or you're a little confused or you just want to see it again and play it for yourself, come see me on Sunday at church and I'll show you. But for now, thank you very much for watching. I hope this has helped to understand the difference, well, the function of the intervals and also how the tones and semitones work in this pattern of keys. And we'll get into the keys next week. That's going to be really fun. Thanks very much, and I'll see you then. Bye for now.